In January of 2025, a team of scientists led by geneticist Stéphane Mazière at Aix-Marseille University in France finished analyzing something that most people alive today have never once thought about: the actual blood type of ancient humans who lived and died tens of thousands of years before recorded history even began. They pulled data from 22 Homo sapiens individuals who lived between 46,000 and 16,500 years ago, 14 Neanderthals stretching back as far as 120,000 years, and one incredibly rare individual, a child born from a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father, another extinct branch of the human family tree. Their remains had been recovered from sites scattered across an enormous stretch of the ancient world, from modern-day Germany all the way to Siberia and China. And when the team finished mapping out the blood types hidden inside all of that ancient DNA, they found something that immediately reshaped how scientists understand the extinction of our closest evolutionary cousins and the survival of our own species. For over 100,000 years, the blood type diversity found inside Neanderthal populations barely changed at all. Generation after generation, for tens of thousands of years, their genetic blood profile remained almost frozen in place. Modern humans, on the other hand, told a completely different story. Shortly after our species began its journey out of Africa, something happened that caused entirely new blood type variants to rapidly appear. Changes so significant that scientists now believe this genetic shift may have played a direct role in why one species of ancient humans survived and spread across the entire planet, while another, genetically stagnant and increasingly vulnerable, quietly vanished from the Earth forever. And that is not even the strangest part of what this research revealed. Buried inside Neanderthal blood was a rare genetic variant so incompatible with the blood of modern humans that scientists now believe it may have made it biologically dangerous, in some cases, for the two species to have children together at all. Now, before you dismiss this as some obscure academic curiosity, understand that blood type research like this touches something every single person alive today carries around inside their own body, right now, without ever thinking twice about it. Every time you have ever needed a blood transfusion, given blood, been pregnant, or filled out a medical form, your blood type mattered, quietly shaping outcomes in ways most people never fully appreciate. And when scientists began comparing blood type data across populations spanning the entire globe, alongside this deep dive into ancient extinct humans, what they found paints one of the most fascinating, most overlooked pictures of human history, hidden anywhere in modern science. Today we are going to walk through this entire story, from blood types older than humanity itself, all the way through ancient extinctions, hidden malaria survival strategies, and a global map of human blood that stretches across every continent on Earth. And by the end, you will never look at your own blood type quite the same way again. Think about the sheer scale of what this research team actually managed to pull off. They were not simply looking at one or two isolated ancient skeletons and drawing broad conclusions. They systematically reconstructed the blood group profile of 37 separate ancient individuals spanning multiple species of ancient humans, spread across more than 100,000 years of deep evolutionary history, and scattered across an area stretching from Western Europe all the way to East Asia. To put that in perspective, most ancient DNA studies focus on a single site, a single population, or a single narrow window of time. This particular investigation cut straight across species boundaries, across tens of thousands of years and across an entire continent, all in pursuit of answering one deceptively simple question: what actually happened inside human blood as our species spread out and took over the entire planet, while a closely related species did not? Let's start with something most people never actually stop to think about: what a blood type even is, and where it came from in the first place. The blood type system most of us are familiar with, A, B, AB, and O, was first discovered back in 1901 by an Austrian scientist named Karl Landsteiner, work that eventually earned him the Nobel Prize. For decades afterward, most people simply assumed blood types were a purely human trait, something that appeared relatively recently in our evolutionary history and existed mainly to complicate blood transfusions in hospitals. But in 2012, a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences delivered a discovery that completely upended that assumption. Researchers compared the genetic variation responsible for A and B blood types across humans, gibbons, and Old World monkeys, species separated from us by tens of millions of years of evolution. And the genetic differences underlying these blood types turned out to be shared across all of these wildly distant species, meaning they could not possibly have evolved independently in each one. They were inherited from a single distant common ancestor, a genetic trait so old that it predates humanity itself, predates apes as we know them, and stretches back tens of millions of years into deep evolutionary time. Scientists call this a trans-species polymorphism, an extraordinarily rare evolutionary phenomenon where a specific genetic trait manages to persist, essentially unchanged, across multiple separate species for tens of millions of years. Your blood type, in other words, is not simply a human invention. It is one of the oldest, most stubbornly persistent genetic traits carried by our entire evolutionary lineage. To really appreciate how strange that actually is, think about how much has changed across the animal kingdom over the last 30 or 40 million years. Entire species have appeared and gone extinct. Continents have drifted apart. Ice ages have come and gone multiple times over. And yet, sitting quietly inside your own blood right now is a genetic system so ancient that a distant primate ancestor of yours, living tens of millions of years before the very first humans ever walked the earth, was already carrying some early version of the exact same biological code. Most traits simply don't survive that kind of evolutionary timescale unchanged. The fact that blood type has managed to persist for so long suggests it must be doing something genuinely important, offering some kind of consistent survival advantage, robust enough to be worth preserving across dozens of millions of years and countless generations of primates, apes, and eventually humans. So if blood types are that ancient, why did our closest extinct relatives, the Neanderthals, apparently get stuck while modern humans kept evolving? This is exactly the question Mazière and his colleagues set out to answer. And the results, published in the journal Scientific Reports, tell a genuinely gripping evolutionary detective story. Neanderthals lived across Eurasia for an almost unimaginably long stretch of time, roughly 250,000 years, before being completely replaced by modern humans throughout their entire territory around 40,000 years ago. And when researchers examined blood group diversity across Neanderthal individuals separated by tens of thousands of years and thousands of kilometers, the genetic picture looked remarkably, almost suspiciously uniform. According to the study, Neanderthal red blood cell diversity remained essentially unchanged from 120,000 years ago all the way through to their extinction. A population that genetically static over that long a stretch of time typically points toward one uncomfortable explanation: a small, increasingly isolated population, likely experiencing inbreeding and demographic fragility, unable to generate or maintain the kind of genetic diversity a species usually needs to adapt and survive when the environment around it starts changing. This finding actually lines up with an earlier related study, published back in 2021 in the journal PLOS ONE by a research team led by paleoanthropologist Silvana Condemi, also working out of CNRS and Aix-Marseille University. That earlier study focused specifically on the blood groups of 3 Neanderthal individuals and 1 Denisovan, examining 7 distinct blood group systems typically used in modern medical transfusions. What they found was genuinely surprising in its own right. Contrary to a long-standing assumption that Neanderthals were uniformly type O, similar to how chimpanzees are almost universally type A and gorillas almost universally type B, the researchers discovered that Neanderthals actually displayed the full range of ABO blood type variability found in modern humans today. At the same time, the blood group alleles they carried lined up closely with patterns still found in modern sub-Saharan African populations, offering further genetic confirmation of the long-established theory that Neanderthals, like every other branch of the human family tree, ultimately trace their deepest origins back to Africa. But even with this initial diversity confirmed, the picture that emerged was still one of a population under genetic strain, carrying low overall diversity and showing clear signs of the kind of demographic fragility that so often precedes extinction. Modern humans tell an almost opposite story. According to the research, brand new genetic variants for Rh blood types, specifically variants in genes called RhD and RhCe, emerged in our species sometime after early Homo sapiens left Africa, but before they spread out across the wider Eurasian continent. And the researchers believe they have pinpointed almost exactly where and how this happened. Archaeological evidence suggests that as early Homo sapiens groups made their way out of Africa, they paused for an extraordinarily long stretch of time, roughly 15,000 years, in a region called the Persian Plateau, located between the Zagros Mountains in modern-day Iran. According to the research team, this extended layover appears to have functioned almost like a genetic incubator, a long enough pause in one place for new genetic mutations affecting blood type to emerge, take hold, and spread throughout the population, before humans then continued their journey deeper into Eurasia and eventually across the entire globe. Fernando Villanea, a population geneticist at the University of Colorado Boulder who was not directly involved in the study, described the discovery as fascinating, noting that it was genuinely unexpected that so much new blood type variation could have evolved in such a comparatively short window of evolutionary time. Picture what those 15,000 years on the Persian Plateau would have actually looked like for the people living through them. Generation after generation, families would have been born, grown up, had children of their own, and died, all within the same broad stretch of territory, repeating that cycle for roughly 600 human generations before the wider population ever continued its journey further into Eurasia. That is more than enough time for small genetic mutations to arise randomly, spread through a population via ordinary reproduction, and, if they happen to offer any kind of survival advantage at all, become increasingly common with each passing generation. In evolutionary terms, 15,000 years sitting in one relatively stable location is an enormous amount of time, more than enough to meaningfully reshape a population's genetic makeup before it ever continues moving onward into new, unfamiliar territory. Why would this matter so much for survival? Because blood types are not just some neutral, cosmetic biological detail. They sit directly on the front line of your immune system's ongoing war against disease. Each blood group system is built around specific proteins and antigens sitting on the surface of your red blood cells. And different diseases, different parasites, and different regional pathogens interact with those surface proteins in wildly different ways. As Homo sapiens spread out of Africa and into entirely new environments across Eurasia, they would have encountered brand new diseases their bodies had never faced before. According to leading population geneticists studying this exact question, blood types have been an extremely strong target of what's called positive selection throughout human history, meaning that if a particular blood type variant happened to offer even a small survival advantage against a locally circulating disease, that variant could spread through the population astonishingly quickly. In other words, that period on the Persian plateau may not have simply produced new blood types by random chance alone. It may have actively selected for genetic variants capable of protecting early modern humans against unfamiliar diseases they were about to encounter as they pushed further into completely new territory. While Neanderthal populations, already established across Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years and seemingly locked into genetic stagnation, simply could not keep pace. And then there's the detail that makes this entire story feel almost eerily personal. The discovery that Neanderthal blood may have actively worked against successful reproduction with modern humans. According to the research, Neanderthals carried a specific and remarkably rare Rh blood type, one that exists in modern human populations only very rarely today. This particular Rh variant is genetically incompatible with the more common Rh variants found in both Homo sapiens and Denisovans. If you've ever heard of Rh disease, also known as hemolytic disease of the newborn, you already understand exactly why this incompatibility matters so much. When a mother's blood carries an Rh type that clashes with her developing baby's Rh type, her immune system can begin producing antibodies that attack the baby's red blood cells, sometimes with fatal consequences if left untreated. We already know from extensive genetic evidence that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens did interbreed, which is exactly why most people of non-African descent today carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA scattered throughout their genome. But according to this new blood type research, that interbreeding may have come with a serious biological cost. If a Neanderthal parent carried this rare, incompatible Rh variant, any resulting pregnancy with a Homo sapiens partner could have faced a dramatically elevated risk of miscarriage or newborn complications, exactly the kind of biological friction that would have made successful, healthy Neanderthal-human hybrid births measurably less common over time, even in cases where the two populations were regularly encountering and mating with one another. It's worth being clear about exactly how researchers were able to reconstruct a detail this specific from genetic material tens of thousands of years old. The 2021 study led by Condemi's team examined Rh gene variants sitting within these ancient genomes at an extremely fine level of detail. Comparing the specific antigen structures those variants would have produced against modern human and Denisovan variants using the same kind of blood compatibility framework hospitals rely on today when matching donors to patients. What they found were Neanderthal Rh allele variants, encoding for what's called a partial RhD, RhC, and Rhe antigen structure, essentially incomplete versions of these surface proteins, compared to their fully formed counterparts in modern humans and in the Denisovan genome they examined. Partial antigen structures like these are already well documented in modern medicine as capable of triggering an immune response when a person's body encounters a fully formed version of that same antigen for the first time, precisely the mechanism that can lead to hemolytic disease during pregnancy. Finding this exact same biological signature preserved inside genuine tens of thousands of years old Neanderthal DNA gave researchers a genuinely rare direct window into a reproductive obstacle that would have been playing out in real prehistoric families, generation after generation, without any of the people living through it ever understanding why. Put all of these pieces together and you get a genuinely chilling evolutionary picture. Neanderthals, already struggling with genetic stagnation and shrinking population diversity, appear to have also been carrying a blood type incompatibility that may have quietly, biologically undermined their own reproductive success whenever they did interbreed with the increasingly widespread and rapidly diversifying population of modern humans expanding into their territory. It's not a single dramatic cause of extinction, no meteor impact, no sudden catastrophic event. It's something far more subtle and, in some ways, far more unsettling. A species slowly losing an evolutionary arms race that was, quite literally, written into their own blood. Now let's fast forward tens of thousands of years, all the way up to the present day, because the story of human blood type diversity does not end with Neanderthals and Denisovans. It continues, in an equally fascinating way, across every single population alive on Earth right now. If you were to compare blood type distributions across the entire modern world today, you would find patterns so dramatic, so wildly different from one region to the next, that they read almost like a hidden map of human migration, disease, and survival, written directly into the population statistics of every country on the planet. Take a look at the indigenous populations of the Americas, and you'll find one of the single most striking patterns in all of global blood type data. In isolated indigenous communities across the Americas, type O blood frequently reaches levels of 90 to 100% of the entire population, an almost unbelievable level of genetic uniformity. In Peru, specifically, type O blood accounts for roughly 71% of the entire national population. This extraordinary concentration of a single blood type traces directly back to a powerful combination of founder effects and centuries of relative isolation, small founding populations crossing into an entirely new continent, followed by many thousands of years with limited genetic mixing from outside groups, allowing one dominant blood type to become overwhelmingly prevalent across an enormous geographic area. Compare that to Europe, where blood type distribution looks far more mixed and varied from country to country, or to parts of Central Asia, where you find some of the highest concentrations of type B blood found anywhere on the planet. A pattern many researchers connect to the historical spread of nomadic populations and repeated waves of migration across the Eurasian steppe over thousands of years. Meanwhile, if you travel across East Asia, you find a noticeably different pattern, populations tending to show higher frequencies of both A and B blood types compared to European populations. Every single one of these regional patterns is, in its own way, a fossilized record of ancient migration, isolation, and disease pressure, written not into stone tools or pottery shards, but directly into the blood of the people living there today. And if you travel specifically into West and Central Africa, you encounter one of the most fascinating blood type stories anywhere on the planet, one directly tied to humanity's oldest and most persistent killer, malaria. Scientists have discovered that a specific blood group variant known as Duffy negative occurs at extraordinarily high frequency across West and Central African populations, in some regions reaching close to universal levels within the local population. For decades, doctors and researchers believed this Duffy negative trait provided near total protection against a specific strain of malaria called Plasmodium vivax, because the malaria parasite typically relies on the Duffy protein sitting on the surface of red blood cells in order to successfully invade and infect them. Without that Duffy protein present at all, the theory went, the parasite simply couldn't get a foothold. This single genetic trait is now believed to have spread and become concentrated across huge swaths of Africa specifically because it offered such a powerful survival advantage against one of the deadliest diseases in human history, malaria, killing more human beings throughout history than nearly any other single cause of death. Think about the raw evolutionary math behind a trait like that. Malaria has been quietly killing enormous numbers of people, generation after generation, for thousands upon thousands of years, particularly across large parts of Africa, where the mosquitoes carrying the parasite thrive in the local climate. Any genetic mutation capable of offering even a modest survival edge against a disease that lethal and that relentless would spread through a population extraordinarily quickly, as the people carrying that protective mutation simply survived long enough, generation after generation, to have more children than those who didn't. Over enough centuries, that kind of relentless selective pressure can push a once rare genetic mutation all the way up to near universal frequency across an entire region, which is exactly the pattern researchers have documented with Duffy negative blood across huge stretches of West and Central Africa today. But here's where the story takes a genuinely unsettling modern twist. Researchers have recently discovered that this protection is no longer as absolute as scientists once assumed. Studies conducted in Madagascar and across other regions of Africa have now confirmed real cases of vivax malaria infection occurring in Duffy-negative individuals, populations that, for roughly a century, had been considered essentially immune to this specific strain of the disease. According to researchers studying this shift, evidence increasingly suggests that certain strains of the malaria parasite are actively evolving new ways to invade Duffy-negative red blood cells, bypassing the very genetic defense that had protected millions of people for generations. This is exactly the kind of relentless, ongoing evolutionary arms race that has been playing out between the human immune system and infectious disease for our entire history as a species. A war being fought right now, quietly, inside the blood of millions of people, most of whom have absolutely no idea it's even happening. And malaria is far from the only disease with a direct, measurable link to blood type. Modern medical research has repeatedly found connections between specific ABO blood types and a surprising range of health outcomes. Studies have found that people with type A blood may face a somewhat higher risk of developing gastric ulcers and certain forms of stomach cancer compared to people with other blood types. During the early stages of the global COVID-19 pandemic, multiple research teams around the world identified a measurable statistical link between blood type and infection severity, with several studies suggesting that people with type O blood appeared to experience comparatively milder outcomes, while people with type A blood showed a somewhat elevated risk of severe illness. The researchers have continued refining and debating the exact strength and mechanism behind this connection ever since. Separately, decades of medical research have also established a well-documented connection between blood type and cholera, another disease with a long, brutal history of large-scale outbreaks, with evidence suggesting that people with type O blood tend to experience notably more severe symptoms when infected compared to people with other blood types, an almost ironic twist, given that type O offers such strong protection against other diseases in other parts of the world. Researchers have also identified associations between ABO blood type and a range of other conditions, including certain patterns of blood clotting risk, cardiovascular disease, and even some subtler biochemical and psychological characteristics observed across large population studies. A recent study conducted on a Taiwanese population, for example, found possible associations between specific ABO blood types and conditions ranging from asthma to obsessive compulsive tendencies, alongside distinct biochemical profiles worth further investigation. It's important to be clear that findings like these are often described by the researchers themselves as inconsistent from one study to the next, shaped by differences in genetic diversity between populations, regional environmental factors, and sometimes limited sample sizes that make broad generalizations difficult. But taken together, the sheer accumulated weight of evidence across dozens of separate studies, spanning multiple countries and multiple diseases, makes it very hard to dismiss blood type as biologically irrelevant to your overall health. It clearly matters, in ways scientists are still actively working to fully understand. It's worth pausing here to address one particularly persistent piece of popular blood type folklore, the so-called blood type diet, a theory that gained enormous popularity through best-selling books, claiming that people should eat specific foods based entirely on their ABO blood type in order to optimize health, digestion, and even personality traits. While it's genuinely true that blood type is connected to real measurable differences in disease susceptibility, immune function, and even certain biochemical characteristics, as multiple modern research studies analyzing large population datasets have confirmed, the scientific evidence supporting a personalized blood type diet specifically has remained thin at best, with most rigorous studies finding no meaningful connection between blood type and how someone's body actually responds to different categories of food. It's a perfect example of how a real, legitimate area of genuine scientific interest can end up wrapped in layers of popular myth and oversimplified marketing, obscuring the genuinely fascinating biology hiding underneath. So what does all of this add up to when you step back and look at the complete picture stretching from ancient Neanderthal caves all the way to a modern hospital blood bank? Blood type is not some minor, forgettable footnote buried inside your medical chart. It is one of the oldest, most evolutionarily significant traits carried inside the human body. A genetic feature so ancient it predates our entire species by tens of millions of years, shared in some form with distant primate cousins, separated from us by an almost incomprehensible stretch of evolutionary time. It is a trait that appears to have remained locked in place, stagnant and unchanging, inside a population of ancient humans who ultimately went extinct, while rapidly evolving and diversifying inside the population of ancient humans who went on to conquer, quite literally, the entire planet. It may have quietly complicated reproduction between two different species of ancient humans tens of thousands of years ago, and it continues, right now in the present day, to shape which diseases different populations around the world are naturally more resistant to, and which ones remain a genuine threat. Consider just how much modern medicine still depends on getting this right, every single day, in hospitals all across the world. Blood banks have to carefully track and maintain supplies across all 8 major blood types, because a mismatch during a transfusion isn't just ineffective, it can trigger a severe and potentially fatal immune reaction. Hospitals, serving communities with different ancestral backgrounds, often see very different demand patterns for specific blood types. Exactly the kind of regional variation this entire story has been tracing all the way back to ancient migration, isolation, and disease pressure. Expecting mothers are still routinely tested for Rh compatibility with their unborn child, a direct modern echo of the exact same biological mechanism that may have complicated pregnancies between Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens tens of thousands of years ago. In a very real, very immediate sense, the deep evolutionary history uncovered by this research isn't simply an interesting story about the distant past. It's actively shaping medical decisions being made in hospitals around the world at this very moment. Every single person alive today is walking around with a piece of this enormous, sprawling evolutionary story quietly encoded inside their own blood, whether they are aware of it or not. Somewhere inside your own body, right now, sits a genetic signature that traces back through tens of thousands of years of human migration, disease, survival, and evolutionary pressure, connecting you directly to ancestors who crossed the Persian Plateau on their way out of Africa, who may have interbred with Neanderthals along the way, who then spread out across every corner of an entire planet, adapting generation after generation to whatever new disease or environmental pressure happened to be waiting for them next. Blood banks sorted into simple letters and plus or minus signs on a small plastic card, but underneath that simple label sits one of the deepest, most genuinely revealing records of human history that modern science has ever managed to read. So the next time you glance down at your own blood type, whether it's printed on an old donor card tucked away in a drawer somewhere or listed on a medical form you filled out without a second thought, take a moment to actually consider what that handful of letters and symbols is quietly telling you. It's not just a piece of information hospitals need in case of an emergency. It's a fragment of an evolutionary story tens of millions of years in the making, one that stretches from ancient primates through the rise and fall of entire species of extinct humans, across every disease that has ever swept through a human population, and all the way down to the very blood running through your own body at this exact moment. Scientists spent years piecing this story together, comparing ancient bones, extinct species, and modern populations scattered across every continent on Earth. And what they found is a reminder that even the most ordinary seeming details of our biology, the kind of thing most of us never think twice about, can end up holding some of the most extraordinary stories our species has ever managed to uncover about where we came from and how we managed to survive long enough to tell the story at all.